Cool. Right. Well, thank you. I've been tuning into the chats there. There's a lot of familiar faces in here, so I'm glad to see that. It actually does feel a little bit like a proper meetup. That's kind of the thing I said about the last one, is that with that DJ at the beginning, it's like you just get yourself in the mood for a party and you see all these familiar faces flicking through the chat and stuff like that, and it just feels as though it's the next best thing to a physical meetup, I think. So a nice one for putting it on. And thank you for tuning in. I've seen, obviously, there's some familiar faces in the chat, and some people know VUX World, some people know me, some people might not. So if you don't, I'm Kane Simms, one of the co-founders of VUX World, and over the last 3 years or so, we've kind of been involved in almost every nook and cranny of the kind of voice AI industry, whether it's through the podcast, whether it's through work that we've done with clients, and here, there, and everywhere. And so we kind of, in voice marketing specifically, we've worked across a lot of other areas that span right across conversational AI, but we've done quite a bit of work and spoke to quite a lot of people on our podcast and through the work we've been doing about voice marketing. And so for those of you looking at doing something when it comes to voice marketing, I thought I'd put together a little 10 minutes worth of mistakes that you should look to avoid if you are going to do that. This is intended to be like a 10 in 10 thing. And Tim, you mentioned that we're already over by 2 minutes, and this is the kind of thing that would probably usually take me a good 20 minutes that I'd allow for. And then in reality, it takes me about 35 minutes because I don't shut up. And so we'll see how we get on for time. But I don't want to take the mic, because we know we've got Sam coming up next, and Sam is an interesting guy. So let's do this without further ado. So the first mistake that I've noticed companies make when it comes to implementing voice AI is that they do it for the wrong reasons. Or voice marketing specifically, they do it for the wrong reasons. They do it, and this guy here standing with the American flag is to represent that some brands do it simply just to put a stake in the ground and just to kind of mark their territory and put a flag down to say, we've done voice, we've done something on Alexa, we've done something on Google Assistant. Or they do it because maybe they've got a little bit of budget left over, they're wondering what to do, or they do it because it might be exciting or it sounds pretty cool, or they do it because everyone else is doing it, the competition's doing it, or they've read headlines about it, and they kind of like feel compelled to do it, a little bit like, you know, when everyone kind of raced to have a Facebook page in like 2008 or whenever it was. And the risk of doing that is that you miss the opportunity to really take voice for what it actually is, which is a potential core part of growing your business. It could be not just Alexa and Google Assistant, voice in general could be for many organizations a real vital part of your organization and a real vital part of what you do on a daily basis. And if you don't start from the point of view of what is going to contribute strategically to the aims of the business, and also what's going to genuinely add value to the user, then you might get yourself in a little bit of hot water, because it sets the train for a big knock-on effect, some of which we'll come to right now. The other thing is that if you're just doing it for the sake of it and you're just putting a stake in the ground, there tends to in some occasions, there isn't a great deal of budget around to do something with. As I mentioned, some brands have kind of got a bit of budget towards the end of the year and they want to kind of do something. And there's a general lack of awareness for those that do it for the first time about how much this stuff actually costs. You've got a whole load of upfront work to be done to figure out what it is that you should be doing in the first place. You've got a whole lot of design and prototyping and testing to be done to validate whether your idea is a decent idea. You've got a whole load of building and coding and more testing to be done and usability testing to be done to figure out what you've done, whether it's actually doing the thing that you want it to do, and a whole host of other things. It takes a multidisciplinary team to do something, and so it's not quick, it's not cheap, it's not easy. There's a hell of a lot more to it, and so if you, as what is this? This isn't Squidward, is it? I can't remember the name of this character. It's been a while since I watched SpongeBob. Even though my son is getting to the age where he's probably almost going to be on SpongeBob soon, so I'm looking forward to that. But you can't just kind of wave $3 around and expect something to be done in the next 2 weeks, because it takes a lot longer to do something properly, and it costs a little bit more than you might think. And the result of those two things, the result of not starting out from a strategic perspective, not starting out from a user-centered perspective and trying to add value to the customer, and not starting out with the budget that you need to do something properly, you end up with a relatively poor execution. It means that you may start with a use case that doesn't particularly make sense. It may be that the actual implementation of it leaves a little bit to be desired, and you're kind of not setting yourself up to get the real best out of it. And what the difficulty reality is that, as you know, Amazon, Google, they use things like ratings and reviews and stuff like that as one of the metrics that kind of that they use to understand whether something is worth promoting to people. And if you don't execute something well, you're never going to get people returning, because the experience just isn't worth returning back to. And then you're going to start to kind of affect those algorithms right from the get-go. Instead of sending positive signals out when you launch something, you're going to start sending slightly negative signals out, and you're not going to set yourself up to grow in the right kind of way. Related to that, and I've put this in here on purpose, one, because I like Jim Carrey, and I also like Will Ferrell, and this clip is a pretty cool and funny clip. If anyone's never seen Night of the Roxbury, by the way, you should check it out. It's like one of the early Will Ferrell films. It's wicked. But one of the mistakes that brands make is that they forget to invest in sound design. Bearing in mind that we're talking about an audio first medium here. Voice is an audio first medium. It's linear. It's audio in. Most of the time it's audio out. Obviously, we've got smart displays and mobile and the whole kind of multimodal, kind of multifaceted interfaces to consider, which will be more important, I think, in the next few years. But for voice only specifically, it's a sound audio, it's an audio medium. And so when you don't invest in sound design, you lose a key point of differentiation there. If you use, for example, the standard Alexa voice, unless you've got a use case that warrants piggybacking on Alexa's persona, if you use the standard Alexa voice, you're just kind of blending in with the crowd. And so I would definitely advise that if you've got a use case that's aligned to your business objectives, you've got the budget to do something well, you've got a use case that makes sense, invest the extra dollars or pounds or euros on making it sound top notch, because the sound of whatever it is that comes out of that speaker or that phone or whatever it is that you've put it into is pretty much the only thing that the user is going to actually experience most of the time. It's easy to be forgotten about, but it is one of the most fundamental things that creates what you would call an experience. So don't forget about that. The other thing is that brands tend to often think short term. Marketing teams have got budgets to last them 12 months. They need to get it spent by the end of the year. You need to do something within that year that's going to get them an immediate return. And often when you spend that money on advertising, or you spend it on Facebook, or you spend it on content or whatever, there kind of is a relatively short term return on that kind of stuff. But as I mentioned, this isn't like that. This isn't like social media. It's not like building a website and then promoting it over Google AdWords and doing your right targeting and getting traffic to it and converting. It takes a hell of a lot of time and effort just to stand something worthy up in the first place, and a hell of a lot more effort to turn it into something that is worthy of long-term success. And so when you think short-term and you try and do something that's a little bit one-off and a bit of a flash in the pan, you're potentially missing out on a whole load more value there if you were thinking a little bit more longer term. And the other thing with that is that when you build something, and the technology that you build, don't kind of build it in isolation that's tied to a specific use case. Try and do it in such a way that you can repurpose it later on down the line, because it might be that if you build one skill that does one thing, it might be that another idea that you can piggyback off the back of means that you can repurpose all of that work and reuse it later on. This is the kind of the issue around, or the decision around buying versus building. If you buy in a tool and you design in a tool, you might not necessarily be able to repurpose all of that stuff quite as easily for another channel or whatever as you would do if you were to build something yourself. And so try not to think short term. Try and think about what will this thing do for you in 3 years time, and then start with the first version, which is the crawl, and then the walk, and then the run after that. And the next thing which is related to that is that often people don't build things that are scalable. And when I say scalable here, I don't mean repurposing into a different use case further down the line. I mean, if you're going to build something and you're going to put something on Google Assistant, you may as well think, and this is the way that we try and get everybody to think of, is rather than thinking about it as a Google Assistant action, think about it as either an audible experience or a conversation. And when you start to think about it as a conversation, you start to work out design patterns and interaction patterns that you can essentially use in any conversational channel, be that through Facebook Messenger, Instagram Messenger, WhatsApp, a chatbot on your website, or a voice bot on your website, or Google Assistant, or Alexa, etc., etc., etc. And so when you do come to actually implement something, do it in a way that doesn't kind of box you in like Austin Powers. Make sure you do it in a way that will allow you to scale it into other channels in future, because you get a hell of a lot more economies of scale out of building something from the beginning that you have an eye on being able to put into different channels in future. The biggest mistake, arguably, is that because you don't have any budget at the beginning to dedicate to this thing, you kind of forget about promoting it. And voice isn't like the web, or it's not like LinkedIn, where organic reach is just like absolutely fantastic. Like, it takes a lot of work to acquire users and even more work to keep hold of users. And so you wouldn't believe how many projects have gone live with something that is worthy of telling people about, but the whole promotional aspect, the whole marketing aspect of it is kind of lost. It's almost like going live is the end rather than the beginning, which is ironic because a lot of these efforts are done for marketing purposes, yet the actual marketing of the thing is always a second thought. And I hope actually Ravi talks about the Match of the Day magazine quiz that they did, because the promotion side of that was one of the better examples that I've seen. So don't forget to plan right from the beginning about how you're going to promote it and how you're going to get the word out for it. Lastly, it's not actually lastly, there's a few more left to go. I don't know what we're doing for time, Tim, but I think we're on a roll, so let's crack on. The other thing is that you will do something without thinking about what you want to learn from it. Now, think about it this way. Think about, like, you have the opportunity to have a conversation in a context and environment where you've never really been able to have that actual conversation before. And so what is it that you want to learn from your customers if you were sat in front of them in their front room, or if you were sitting in their ear while they're on the tube or on the train? Like, what kind of learnings can you get from that? What conversations do they actually want to have with you? Where can you provide value? What kind of things do they ask you? What do they actually want from you? What are their needs? And not approaching it from a perspective of what can we learn about our customers and their needs and their behaviors to be able to not just refine this experience, but feed that back into the rest of the marketing that we do, is an opportunity missed. It's a little bit like Will Smith, who goes to school and has so much fun that he forgets to learn, in Prince of Bel-Air. So yes, have KPIs that are aligned to your strategic objectives, which you've already mentioned, but also think about what things do you actually want to learn from this thing. If you're going to go through the pain and effort of putting something out there, what data and learnings do you want to get from it? The other thing is the lack of maintenance. You wouldn't believe how many things go live and that's treated as the end of the project. The reality is, when you click that live button, that's when the actual work begins, because that's when you figure out at scale, hopefully at scale, whether what you've done actually makes sense, actually meets the needs of the customers and the users that are using it. It's all very well putting a whole lot of time and effort into the design, but when you get it into the real world is when you really start learning. Especially, I know we're talking about voice here, but and Alexa and Google Assistant, but especially if you start scaling this thing into other channels, because the use cases might differ slightly, how people use it might differ slightly. And so we always treat the live point, the go live, as the middle of the project. Every single project that we're involved with or plan, we have the go live as the middle, and there's a mandatory month, 2 months at the end of that, which is actually where we refine it and we make it as best as it can be, or as good as it can be. You wouldn't believe how many things go live without this in place. And the final thing is that I know we're all really fans of smart speakers. We're always fans of these new devices that have basically crafted a whole new industry or a whole new device type with the Amazon smart speakers, and Google hot on the heels with their range of smart speakers as well. And it's obvious that you might want to try and look at these devices as opportunities for marketing purposes. The device adoption is growing, usage is growing. COVID has just fueled the usage and all that kind of stuff. But also, there is huge value elsewhere in voice technology to promote and to use it for marketing purposes. Even something like voice enabling some hardware. It was found about a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago, that people will actually consider the voice capability of the potential car they're going to buy as a decision-making factor in buying that car. If you look at the Mercedes advert that they did last year for Super Bowl, they based the entire advert on the Mercedes Assistant, which is essentially using voice for marketing purposes. If they're going to dedicate a whole Super Bowl ad to their voice assistant, then I don't know what is using voice for marketing purposes any more than that. And so, yes, by all means, invest in Alexa. I think the potential of this platform is huge. Same with Google Assistant, and maybe even arguably more so with Google Assistant. But don't forget to look a little bit beyond that and look down the horizon and think about other ways that you can deploy voice technology to add value to customers. God knows how I did for time, but that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed it, and by all means, I'm looking forward to catching up with you in the breakout rooms after Sam's talk. And yeah, there you go. That's the top 10 mistakes that I've seen in the industry when it comes to marketing voice experiences, and how you might be able to avoid them.